Hello, my name's Megan Lilly and I'm Deputy Commissioner at Jobs and Skills Australia, and it's my great privilege to be invited to present to you today at your Skills Kerala Global Summit, focusing on empowering skills for a global future. And I really couldn't think of anything more important for all of us to be talking about. And I also think and believe that the more we share, the better we'll all be for that experience. And I also wish apologies that I wasn't able to get to India. I was very much looking forward to doing that, and particularly catching up with colleagues that I've worked with in India over many years, but unfortunately it was not possible this time. But I would like to share with you what we're doing here at Jobs and Skills Australia and focusing on some of the critical challenges that we have and how we're facing them, but also that others do as well. But before I start, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. They're our First Nation population, and I acknowledge their elders past and present. And this is a tradition that we do in Australia and consider it very important. In sharing today how we're tackling some of these issues around skills and actually meeting the needs of the future, I just want to share with you, first of all, a little bit about Jobs and Skills Australia, and then a little bit about Jobs and Skills Councils and some of the work that we're all collectively focusing on. First of all, Jobs and Skills Australia was established almost 3 years ago, 2 and a bit years ago, and it was established by our Commonwealth Parliament, and it has legislative functions. And you can see those legislative functions there today. I don't propose to read them all to you, but I think you can see upon looking that, it is about focusing on our current, emerging and future labour markets, very, very important. Also looking at our skilling system and how well that's functioning and what's working, what's not. Looking at regional and remote Australia, rural, regional and remote Australia. We're a very big landmass, as are you, and it's important that we look at the needs of both the population across all of the geography. Also looking at pathways into and out of VET. We call it VET, I know you call it TVET, and into higher education, and how those pathways are working, looking at other forms of disadvantage and how barriers can potentially be removed, including barriers around gender, and identifying that supply and demand and where the imbalances occur. And we've had very significant skill shortages in Australia, particularly since COVID. And so, there's quite a challenge in terms of, making sure we've got the right skills in the right place in a very tight labour market. So we're looking at all of those issues plus more, but they're the main things. That's what our legislation asks us to do. We also then have what we call the Commissioner's outcomes. So these are 5 theming things that frame our work. And from here we develop our work plan, our projects and some other bits and pieces that I'll take you through. But they are really about fostering inclusive participation, clearly understanding today's workforce, shaping Australia's future workforce, and I'll spend a bit more time on that, optimising pathways and systems architecture, so looking at how we actually get the system working effectively and how it's contemporary and fit for purpose, and then activating an informed dialogue is really having a good and deep conversation around very, very important and often tricky issues around skilling in Australia. And actually, I would consider what this is today as part of that dialogue. That conversation between Australia and India, in my mind, is equally important and valuable, and the possibility to learn from each other. Part of the architecture that we also have is we have 10 Jobs and Skills Councils in Australia, and these Jobs and Skills Councils have been going for about 3 years, but they have some overlap with previous entities, whether they're sector skills councils or industry skills councils. So we've had a few versions along the way, as I know you have. And in fact, when I was in India about a decade ago, we're looking at the establishment of your sector skills council. So, there's a lot of common ground in this. But our Jobs and Skills Councils now actually have a bigger remit. They obviously develop training product, but they also look at sectoral issues, career information, workforce planning for the industry areas, and actually working with the system to make sure that the blockages are removed. So much bigger remit. And they're really doing some terrific work and being very impactful in the process. So you can see the names of all of them there, but in the purple boxes for your benefit is really just a bit of a description about which industry sectors they cover at that sort of more macro aggregate level. There's obviously many sectors within that. But that's sort of the division that's been settled upon in Australia in terms of moving that forward. So Jobs and Skills Australia and Jobs and Skills Councils do work together, and we work really closely together. But the actual Jobs and Skills Councils are independent companies, and they are funded by the Commonwealth Government and report to the government. But we have very clear delineation of what we do and who does what. So Jobs and Skills Australia, you can see on that slide there, data analysis, independent advice. We provide independent advice to our minister, and we provide independent advice across government to various portfolios on critical issues. We also look at labour market data. We use the data of NCVER, so that's the National Centre for Vocational Education Research, that records all of our enrolments and other data around our training system, and particularly around apprenticeships and the like, completions, all those sorts of issues. And so we work with that data as well. And we also do major projects. The Jobs and Skills Councils also do projects and use all of the data, but they only use it within their industry areas. So we do whole of economy work, whereas they do work that's around their particular industry sector. What they also do that is incredibly important is have deep industry intelligence, so they can engage deeply with their sectors and their stakeholders within the sector. And importantly, that they like us, are established on a tripartite basis. So we have on our boards, and we have deep engagement with employers, with unions, and with government or the training system. So that three-way relationship is a fundamental underpinning of how we go about our work and what we do. So moving along now, what I wanted to focus on is a little bit about the work of Jobs and Skills Australia and how it's contributing, and thinking about it in terms of, empowering skills for a global future, which is, obviously the title of your presentation today. So we do a lot of work around the labour market as it exists. And we have a number of indices that we either use the data and aggregate the data, or we collect some data ourselves. Not much. Most of it we get from our various data agencies, and what we do is integrate it. So, for instance, we have the Internet Vacancy Index, we have an occupational shortage list, we have REOS, Recruitment Experiences and Outlook Survey, and we have regional labour market indicators. We actually have much more than that, but that's just a snapshot of some of the monthly or quarterly labour market data that we collect, publish, and, it helps inform decisions around the system. We also have some system level data, and by that I mean we have what we call our VET National Data Asset, and that really looks at our training system, and it looks at where enrolments occur, where employment occurs as a relation of enrolments, what type of qualifications, what type of income people earn after qualifications, whether they leave some form of income support pre and post qualification. So it looks at all of the benefits of undertaking a vocational program. Very, very powerful data set. This is all freely available on our website. You're very welcome to look. We also have Skills Tracker, which we look at in terms of higher education data, but that one's less developed. But, that will grow, and we'll expand that, and we'll have the full tertiary sector to look at. We also have Atlas, and Atlas looks at the labour market per statistical region for every region in this country, and that sort of includes employment, participation rates, unemployment rates, gender divides, qualification levels, all of that sort of thing around localised labour markets. So really important information for local providers and governments to do a lot of planning, and to look at where challenges or barriers can be addressed and met, or if we get big national initiatives, what we might need to do in particular areas where they are occurring. But what I want to focus on now is really some of the other bit of our work. So it's in our legislation to do what we call capacity or cohort studies. And this is the new piece of work that we've been doing. And it really does focus in on that skills for a global future. So when we talk about a capacity study, you can see the pictures of the reports, or the covers of the reports that we've done that have been released, some of them really quite recently. So, for instance, the most recent report released is actually the one in the very bottom right-hand corner, and it's really about our Gen AI transition. So how generative AI is transforming work, it's augmenting jobs, and it is very uneven in its adoption, and it really looks at what it's going to mean for skills and work in the workforce at large, and makes a number of recommendations about how the skilling system can be sort of focused to help individuals grapple with the AI world that's really coming down upon all of us really quite quickly. But it isn't just about the skilling system. It's actually looking about AI adoption in the workplace, how that's going, and what it's actually going to do to the future of jobs. And so it's not only about whether jobs will, get taken away by AI, or whether people will have the right skills to actually become part of the AI journey. We landed very much on the side that this is going to be largely an augmentation story, so that jobs will be augmented by AI as opposed to automated out, although there clearly will be some of that, and that's sort of the nature of some of these transitions. But we have an optimistic view on the future of AI and our workforce, and actually being able to sort of tackle that great challenge, but also that great opportunity around AI. So it's a really important focus for the future for us. And of course, we need very significant digital underpinning and capability uplift around all of those things. So that will become quite a priority that we're focusing on. We also recently released work on gender, looking at the gender occupational analysis of the Australian workforce and pay gap data in relation to that. So that was a really deep look at how that plays out in our workforce, what it means, and perhaps where some strategies can occur. But you can see from what's on your slide in front of you that, we've also looked at the early childhood education profession. We've got a growing early education care sector in this country and need many more people in it. So how do we best grow that workforce so that we can have a quality care sector? But we're also looking at essential ingredient. That one's about the food supply chain, and I think we're all aware of how important food supply is, and actually keeping that robust and in good flow. There's also the Clean Energy Generation report. That's a couple of years old now, but that is really about the shift to renewables and what it does and what it does for the workforce in terms of that transition from largely fossil fuel type industries into renewable based energy generation, and the redistribution that occurs around that in terms of the jobs being spread, geographically, but also having to rewire the nation as a process. And one thing that report identified for us, that we are very significantly short of electrical workers, and that we need to do a lot of work to train up a lot more electricians or electro-technologists, just really to meet that demand, even by 2030, which is 5 years away. So we have a huge amount of work to do in that space. So these reports not only look at the future and build scenarios and projections out, but they also quantify need and demand and actually help us grapple with some of those really, really important things in terms of managing the skills for the future. The next area that I want to talk about, and this is the project that I have responsibility for at Jobs and Skills Australia, and I'm really delighted to be doing this piece of work. And we're developing a national skills taxonomy, and we're leaning very heavily into a skills-first approach, both underpinning a taxonomy but also the application of it. And there is a number of initiatives around the world, in fact, a growing number of countries that are really either developing their own taxonomies or embracing pre-existing taxonomies, but also really doing a lot of work around a skills-first approach. And it's not to suggest that qualifications don't matter, because qualifications will always matter, but this is beyond the qualifications. When people are gathering all of that experience, how can we actually understand what that is, and how do we keep describing it and giving it a value in terms of the workplace? But also, how does that intersect with qualifications in a more meaningful way? So in developing this taxonomy, the first thing that we're doing may sound fairly self-obvious, but it's actually coming up with a definition of skill. And there has been a number of definitions over time, but not one that's been universally adopted. They've had particular purposes. And we have worked on developing a new definition that will apply to our tertiary sector. So the big focus in Australia now is tertiary sector, and that is vocational and higher education, and building a more joined up, connected and coherent system. And that's a major priority of this government, and they've just released and establishing a new council to actually work to create this more connected, coherent sector. So a lot of work around that. And in developing the taxonomy and the definition is a really critical underpinning, because we need a definition that is broad enough to embrace all of it. And so that really fundamentally gets us moving beyond task. And so that's a piece of work that we're really putting out in the public domain at the moment, and then looking at how we design this taxonomy. But there are a number of reasons for a new skills infrastructure. You can see it actually will, what we're developing is a language. It's not a metric, it's a language for skills. And it will really give a common language for both the education sector, the employment sector, and indeed the individual. It will also be a language that can be used across life, lifelong learning, and actually cross-sectoral. And it will enable or support labour mobility, because it will give better recognition points. And so a common language that does inform skills connections is really what we're focusing on. And it will underpin a lot of our tertiary harmonisation, but also a lot of our Gen AI type work and all these sorts of things that will actually create a new framing for a lot of the things that we need to tackle into the future. Here's just a quick example of what a skills-first approach can look like, in terms of if you take a skill-based view of what a senior account manager actually does, what sort of skills they have. And if you actually look at them, this really is identifying the skills they have, skills they bring to it, skills they've obtained elsewhere. And you can obtain skills from outside a learning environment. It can be in work, but it can also be in the community or daily life. And also helps identify skills people would like to develop. So that's an important sort of where I am now, but where can I go with this, and what can it look like for me? And it is in the language of skills. It's not in the language of curriculum or courseware. And that's a really important thing, because it actually makes it more accessible to employers, to individuals, and indeed reaching into the education system. And so I think you can see from that some of those skills that underpin the role of being a senior account manager are clearly identifiable. They make sense, they're understood, and we can use them to translate that person's life and working experience. In terms of the actual skills taxonomy, we are taking the view that skills are both visible and portable. It really underpins and supports upskilling and reskilling. It does support better job matching, and that's really, really important in a tight labour market. We want our labour market to be as efficient as possible. And also workforce planning, clearly that's got a role there. It would also hopefully reduce training duplication, where people get channeled into things because it's just a pre-existing qualification, rather than recognising where their skills are at and where they could be developed more. And it also looks at innovation and other forms of inclusion. So we're quite hopeful that this will actually be a really significant underpinning for many of the other reforms that we're embarking upon at the moment. We are in a dialogue with a number of other countries internationally that have either developed a taxonomy or are developing their taxonomy or have embraced a skills-first approach. So that growing movement is really quite significant. I think my time's up. That was just a very quick snapshot of some of the things that are happening here in Jobs and Skills Australia, and indeed in Australia, and where we're putting our energy and our focus to tackle the challenges that we face and you face. I'd be delighted to keep this conversation going. Everything I've shared with you today is available on our webpage, so I really encourage you to have a look at the data and have a look at how we're building a really strong evidence base to support the reforms so that we can establish our system, our labour market and our workforce to be as best prepared for the future as possible. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was my pleasure, and I hope to be there in person before too long. Thank you.